crazy. That's what the decision to not call pass interference in the final 2 minutes of the 2018 NFC Championship game was. The New Orleans Saints led the Los Angeles Rams 20-17, entering the fourth quarter on January 20th, 2019. The winner of the game was heading to Super Bowl 53 in Atlanta. I was at the game, anticipating the Saints' second ever trip to the Super Bowl. The trip seemed all but certain late in the game, with the Saints driving and the score tied at 20-all with less than 2 minutes to go. The Saints reached the Rams' 13-yard line and were facing third down with 10 yards to go. If New Orleans could pick up a first down, they could run the clock down to 20 seconds and take a field goal to go up by 3 before sending the ball back to LA. With 1:49 to go, Saints quarterback Drew Brees dropped back to pass and threw to the right sideline toward receiver Tommy Lee Lewis. Before Lewis could reach for the ball, Rams quarterback Nickel Robey-Coleman ran up and blindside tackled him at the 6, sending Lewis flying. Everyone in my section let out several O's for the hit, but for me at least, there was admittedly a little bit of joy in the moment. The hit was clearly illegal. Robey-Coleman tackled Lewis before he got the ball, never turned his head, and could have seriously caused injury. It would be a pass interference penalty. The Saints would get the ball at the 6-yard line and pick up the first down. They'd be in position to score a touchdown, and if not, they could run the clock down to the last moment before attempting an easy 23-yard field goal. That was it. The Saints were going to the Super Bowl. Somehow I managed to process all of this in mere seconds before I and the rest of the 73,000 people in the Superdome flew into a seething, confounded rage. Because while the play was clearly illegal, there was one problem. The officials didn't throw the flag. No yellow marker was seen as the entire stadium erupted in boos. Players on the Saints sideline walked onto the field with their arms up in confusion. Saints head coach Sean Payton was furious, screaming and pleading at the officials to throw a flag, but no flag came. So you know that I'm not just a bitter fan. Let's look at the NFL rulebook from 2018. The play in question was in clear and obvious violation of at least 3 rules.
Rule 852A. Contact by a player who is not playing the ball that restricts an opponent's opportunity to make the catch is prohibited. Rule 852E prohibits players from cutting off the path of an opponent by making contact with him without playing the ball. Rule 1229B states that forcibly hitting the defenseless player's head or neck area with the helmet, face mask, forearm, or shoulder, even if the initial contact is lower than the player's neck, and regardless of whether the defensive player also uses his arms to tackle the defenseless player by encircling or grasping him, is prohibited.
Even Robey-Coleman looked side to side anticipating a flag. After the game, he admitted he got away with a penalty.
Hell yeah, that was PI. I did my part. Referee made the call. We respect it.
Lewis, or what was left of him after the hit, also looked up and around anticipating a flag. It was clear and obvious to everyone. Everyone, except the only people whose opinions mattered. The officiating crew. LA had only one timeout left. Had the flag been thrown, only 1:45 would have remained. The Saints could have run the clock down to just 10 seconds. The Saints' win probability would have been calculated at 98%. With the no call, it dropped to 78%. With 4th down up, the Saints sent kicker Will Lutz out to attempt a 30-yard field goal, which he made. The Rams got the ball back with one timeout left in their pocket and marched down the field to kick a 48-yard field goal of their own with 15 seconds left to tie the game and send it to overtime. While the Saints got the ball to start, just 1 minute in, Brees was hit by linebacker Dante Fowler while attempting to throw deep to receiver Michael Thomas. John Johnson intercepted the pass. The Rams got the ball and managed to get in range for a 57-yard field goal attempt by Greg Zuerlein. The kick was up, the kick was good, and the Rams, not the Saints, won the game and went to Super Bowl 53. I couldn't believe it. I was infuriated. In the moment the flag wasn't thrown, I jumped up and screamed with all my might, "That's fucking bullshit." As the game ended, fans throughout the stadium began throwing beer cans and trash onto the field in anger. Misery, rage, depression, all could be used to describe the mood throughout the city in the immediate aftermath. The front page headline of the Times-Picayune the next day simply read, "Robbed." Payton said in his post-game conference that he had just gotten off the phone with the NFL office, and they admitted that they blew the call. NFL Senior VP of Officiating Al Riveron admitted it. The league admitted it when they proceeded to fine Roby Coleman $26,739 for the play. Still, it wasn't until January 30th at NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell's annual press conference that he addressed the situation. He admitted that officials were human, but that they had missed the call. New Orleans essentially boycotted the Super Bowl that year. In the New Orleans metro area, the game, which the Rams lost to the New England Patriots, drew just a 26.1 television rating, the lowest of any market and the lowest of any Super Bowl in the city's history. The game in general drew an average viewership of 98 million and a total viewership of 149 million, the lowest ratings in a decade. There were lawsuits filed against the NFL by Saints fans trying to change the ruling. The NFL adopted a new policy allowing teams to challenge penalties or no calls for the 2019-2020 season, though the rule was reversed after just 1 year. Goodell, the league, the Rams, every one of them felt the vitriol of New Orleans. Perhaps no one felt the heat worse, however, than the officials, led by head referee Bill Vinovich. Vinovich was publicly accosted and harassed in public at a BYU men's basketball game he was officiating later that week. Vinovich has not officiated a Saints game since the play that became known as the NOLA no call. When I heard Vinovich was harassed in public that week, I shared the story on Facebook with the caption, "Good." In the years since the game, I've written columns for different papers I worked at, asking fans to take it easy on high school officials, saying that the only ref they should be harassing is Bill Vinovich. I want any and all Saints fans listening to know I'm still mad about the no call. I probably always will be. The fact is, his crew made an inexplicable and inexcusable error that cost New Orleans a trip to the Super Bowl. However, the reaction of the fans, throwing things onto the field, my own cursing, the fans harassing Vinovich in public, as the years have gone on, I've looked back on all of it. I've seen how officials are treated at the high school level and at others. And I started to see something seemingly very few people do. Goodell was right about something. Refs are human. I've mentioned in the 2 previous episodes that we'll get into social media and its impact on athletes' mental health. We will mostly dive into that in the second half of this episode. But first, we need to talk about the way we treat refs in our society. The way we treat them, athletes, coaches, and others, all add up to a very important topic: toxic fandom. This is a podcast examining what happens at the intersection of mental health and athletics. It's about taking a look at the human side of those we often view as superhuman. It's an investigation into how it feels internally on a stage that's so external. Most importantly, it's a conversation about people under the brightest of lights and what happens to them when the lights go out. Episode 3, Tucked Up, Noah's Ark. January 19th, 2002. The 11-5 New England Patriots and second-year head coach Bill Belichick are hosting the 10-6 Oakland Raiders, led by fourth-year head coach John Gruden. It's the AFC divisional round of the NFL playoffs. The Raiders entered the postseason seeking their first Super Bowl since 1980, while New England was searching for its first Lombardi Trophy ever. The Raiders were led by 5 Pro Bowlers, including NFL MVP Rich Gannon and future Hall of Famer Charles Woodson. The Patriots, on the other hand, had to overcome some adversity throughout the season. They lost their starting quarterback, 9-year NFL veteran and former number 1 overall pick Drew Bledsoe, to an injury during the second game of the regular season, just months after inking him to a new 10-year contract. As a result, they had to turn to a second-year backup quarterback with no career starts, whom they didn't select until the 6th round of the NFL draft in 2000 out of Michigan. His name was Tom Brady. It was 25 degrees with several inches of snow, and the action was slow most of the game. The Pats found themselves trailing just 13-10 with just over 2 minutes to go when the Raiders punted the ball to Troy Brown, who returned it to the Patriot 46-yard line. In a point that will come up later, Brown actually fumbled the ball before teammate Larry Izzo jumped on top of it. A few plays later, New England was out of timeouts at the Oakland 42. Brady had a quick conversation with offensive coordinator Charlie Weis on the sideline. Raiders defensive back Eric Allen overheard the conversation and picked up the play call, running to the Raiders sideline and informing his team what he had heard. The next play, Brady dropped back to pass. He had no receivers open and began to pump the football. He never saw Woodson, his former Michigan teammate, who blitzed him off the right side. Woodson hit Brady, and the ball came loose. Oakland linebacker Greg Bickert jumped on top of it and made the recovery. There was just 1:50 left on the clock, and with New England out of timeouts, Woodson, the Raiders, and all of Oakland were probably feeling the exact way I did in 2019. It looked like a guarantee that the Raiders were moving on to the AFC Championship game. Except for one thing. 2 years prior, the NFL introduced a new rule, known as the Tuck Rule, which states,
When an offensive player is holding the ball to pass it forward, any intentional forward movement of his arms starts a forward pass, even if the player loses possession of the ball as he is attempting to tuck it back toward his body. Also, if the player has tucked the ball into his body and then loses possession, it is a fumble.
The officials went to video replay to look over what happened, and afterward declared that Brady was attempting to tuck the ball, therefore ruling that the play was an incomplete pass, not a fumble. New England maintained possession. Several Raiders voiced their disagreement with the call. Gruden was quoted on camera after the game saying,
"I will go to my grave believing he fumbled that football."
Now, about what happened after the play. Brady hit receiver David Patton for a 13-yard pass to get New England to the Raider 29-yard line. 3 plays later, kicker Adam Vinatieri came on to attempt a 45-yard field goal through the snow with 27 ticks left on the clock. The kick was later referred to as one of the most difficult kicks in NFL history. The ball went up and through the uprights perfectly. Oakland opted to kneel the ball with 27 seconds left and go to overtime. The Patriots won the coin toss and took possession. 15 plays later, they were 61 yards down the field, thanks to an 8-for-8 drive by Brady, including a 4th down conversion to keep things alive. New England got down to the Oakland 9, and going against the wind, sent Vinatieri out for another kick. Once again, he was perfect, giving the Patriots a 16-13 victory to advance them to the AFC title game. The ESPN 30 for 30 documentary about the game, entitled The Tuck Rule, noted the potential significance of the moment. The Patriots went on to beat the Steelers in the AFC title game and defeated the Rams in the Super Bowl to win their first ever championship. Brady and Belichick went on to win 6 Super Bowls together, with Brady winning a 7th with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before retiring after the 2022 season. New England traded Bledsoe to Buffalo that off-season, despite the financial commitment made to him. The Raiders advanced to the Super Bowl in 2002, but were soundly defeated by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who ironically enough were coached that year by John Gruden. Since losing the Super Bowl, the Raiders have made the playoffs just 2 times. While Belichick stated in the documentary that Brady had done enough that season to earn the starting job, and that he would have been back as the starter even if the game had gone differently, Brady suggested in the same documentary that he wasn't as sure, given the financial commitment New England made to Bledsoe. Woodson wondered what could have been for his own career had the play gone the Raiders' way. Would Oakland have won the Super Bowl that season? Would Brady have had the opportunity to go on and become the greatest quarterback of all time, as he's widely considered now? There's still a ton of uncertainty about what could have been if things had gone differently. Gruden was later rehired by the Raiders in 2018, in which he joked, "Brady fumbled that ball." While Brady argued that the call was correct in the documentary, he has publicly suggested in the past that the play might have been a fumble. There was only one opinion that mattered then, just like in 2019. The documentary crew spoke primarily with Brady and Woodson, but I wanted to talk to the person who was responsible for making the call. And so, through a few unlikely channels, I was able to make that happen.
Well, I'm Walt Coleman, and I'm a retired NFL official, having served 30 years on the field in the National Football League.
Walt Coleman was the referee for the Tuck Rule game. It was his crew that initially ruled the play a fumble, and it was his decision to overturn that ruling. Walt's a native of Little Rock, Arkansas, and just recently turned 72. His dad was a high school and college official, spending 26 years as a ref in the Southwest Conference. Multiple other members of his family were officials as well.
I had been around officiating basically my whole life. And so when I graduated from college, I decided that I would go into the family business, which we are a dairy processing business, and also start officiating. So I signed up to start working junior high and high school games with the Arkansas Activities Association when I graduated from college.
Walt began officiating games in 1974. He worked his way up from junior high and high school games to small college contests for 5 years before starting to work for the Southwest Conference. He spent 5 seasons there before following his dad's advice and applying for a job with the National Football League, which he ultimately got. Walt began his NFL career in 1989 as a line judge. He became a referee in 1995, a position he held for the next 24 years. It was in his 6th year, however, that he had what he admitted himself was the most recognized moment of his career. To this day, fans in the New England area view Walt as a divine judge who saw what others failed to see. In Northern California, Las Vegas, and many other parts of the country, he's viewed the same way New Orleans views Bill Vinovich.
That particular play and that particular game has kind of been what I'm known for. The Patriot fans think I'm terrific, and the Raider fans don't think so much highly of it. And the thing you have to remember is even though Oakland was up in Northern California, they have a lot of fans scattered all over the country. So there are actually Raider fans that live in Arkansas. So I don't have to go all the way to Northern California to find people that know about me and Tuck Rule and how I cheated the Raiders out of that divisional football game. So I'm blamed for the Raiders' demise and Tom Brady being the great quarterback that he turned out to be, which is all crazy, but that's how fans operate.
I couldn't help but ask Walt to take me through what happened on the field from his point of view. What did he see in the moment that led him to overturn the call? A rule that multiple members of the Raiders said they didn't even know existed. How did he recognize it so clearly? But first, if like me, you're still a little confused on what the rule is, here's Walt's explanation.
At that time, if a quarterback's arm was going forward and he decided to change his mind and not throw it, he had to tuck it all the way back against his body, and then if the ball came out, it was considered a fumble. But if it came out anywhere during that whole process of bringing the ball all the way down, if it came out, it was considered an incomplete forward pass.
If you Google the Tuck Rule, The second result you'll get after the 2001 AFC divisional game is that the rule was abolished in 2013, 12 years after the game. Walt contended that the rule itself wasn't eliminated, and they just changed the rule of what a fumble is, what constitutes a forward pass, and so on. The reason, according to him, is that it's a difficult play to officiate. Either way, the rule remained in place long after the contest between the Pats and the Raiders. As for the moment itself,
for me in that particular play, Brady decided not to throw it, but as he was bringing the ball down, it was about at his waist level or whatever. Woodson hits him and it falls out of his hand. Well, for most normal people and people who don't know the rule, it looked like a fumble. All the announcers that were broadcasting the game, said it was a fumble and it wouldn't be changed, and Oakland won the game and so forth. And it looked like a fumble, but unfortunately for the Raiders and fortunately for the Patriots, that's not what the rule book said. And that Brady hadn't got the ball tucked against his body. It just came out in part of his motion, which made it a incomplete forward pass.
The NFL rules state that the replay must be clear and obvious in order to change what the call on the field is. Walt explained that what went into his decision-making was exactly what the league taught him to do.
On the field, when it happened, I ruled it a fumble. Because from where I was standing, from behind the offense, behind the quarterback, Woodson screened me out along with Brady's body, and I couldn't see exactly when the ball came out. And back then, because of the replay rules, if there was any question, you had to rule it a fumble. Because if you ruled it an incomplete pass, you couldn't fix it. That was not reviewable. If there was any doubt, you ruled fumble. So that's what I did. I ruled it as a fumble. When I got on the replay, I had a shot from the front where I wasn't screened out, and it was obvious what happened. All I did is change a fumble to an incomplete pass. It's what happened after it that created all the commotion and the fact that they went on the next week and beat Pittsburgh. Then the next week, they went and played St. Louis in the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. I mean, if none of that had happened, nobody'd be talking about this play 20 years afterwards. But that's not what happened. So, as they say, the rest is history.
While Walt officiated a number of Patriot games over the remainder of his career, he never reffed a Raiders game again. The league places rules on media availability for officials. They have to get permission to speak with reporters on anything if they still work for the league. As such, Walt wasn't able to speak about the play the rest of his time as an official without the league's say-so.
And they would not do that every time the NFL films ask. So this last time, obviously, I was retired. So they didn't have any control over whether I participated or not. But the few times before that, they weren't that receptive to allowing me to talk about it. Even though I got the call right. But who cares about whether I got it right or not if you're a Raider fan?
We know what happened for the Patriots after, and all the glory they went on to achieve. We also know that was essentially the beginning of the end for the Raiders. But what about for Walt? There was no social media back then, and the World Wide Web was still in the dial-up days. Still, that didn't stop him from hearing it on all ends of the public through fax machine and voicemail. He also got it hard in the press. As for the Raider players, they maintained in the 30 for 30 that the play was a fumble to this day. Raiders owner Al Davis died in 2011, but when the tuck rule was changed in 2013, Patriots owner Robert Kraft said he believed that somewhere Davis was smiling. As for Davis's thoughts on Walt, well, Walt had a story for us.
The Sporting News went out to Oakland and interviewed Al Davis. And for some reason, they asked him about the Winter Olympics. Now, this was the Winter Olympics, you'll remember, where they had the scandal in figure skating, where this French judge basically cheated in the pairs competition, cheated and scored the Russians. She owed a favor to the Russians. And so in her scoring, she cheated, which allowed the Russian pair to win when the Canadian pair should have won the gold medal. Well, somehow or another, they figured this out and created this big to-do as far as in those Winter Olympics. Well, they asked Al Davis about that, and Al Davis' comment was that he had no idea that Walt Coleman was from France.
What I found interesting, and honestly even a bit admirable, was that Walt found humor in the whole thing.
For me, it was just great material for talks. And you know, as far as motivational talks and talking to civic clubs and so forth, I mean, people love to laugh at those kind of things when it's being sent to somebody else. Now, if it was sent to them, obviously it'd be a whole different story, but you know, it's funny.
I have to admit, I laughed at the story about Davis's comment when Walt told me. I only got to know Walt in the hour we were on Zoom together and through reading about him on Google, but personally, I found him rather charming. He joked, told stories, and explained how he came from a family of officials. It was somewhere in there that I thought back to what Goodell said at his annual press conference. Refs are human. That's who I was talking to. A human. But when they put on those black and white striped shirts, suddenly people seem to forget that. I mentioned earlier having written columns asking communities to ease up on the refs. That's because over the years I've witnessed and overheard some pretty disgusting behavior at the high school and college level. Parents rushing down the stands and yelling in refs' faces. Players cursing at them. Coaches chasing them onto the courts. Children as young as 5 chanting, "Ref, you suck," with parents laughing and calling the officials garbage and trash. No matter what call you make, everyone hates you. For what it's worth, Walt didn't have a problem hearing it from the fans. He never would have signed up for the job in the first place if he did.
That kind of stuff never bothered me because that's what you expect if you're an official. That's the way it always is from day one. So criticism from fans, text, phone calls, any of that kind of stuff, it didn't affect me at all. You're expected to get booed. You're expected at the game to have them say, "Refs suck, refs suck." I mean, and have 80,000 people doing that. That means you're out there doing your job.
Of course, it's a job that, as Walt points out, everyone seems to know how to do. It seems to be a near universal consensus that the way refs are treated is worse than ever, especially at the youth levels. As such, something he's noticed in Arkansas that I noticed in all my different travels is that it's become harder and harder to find officials to overview games.
It's a big problem, and I was at a national officials meeting, and one of the speakers made the comment, says, now, you just think about this now. How many people, if you put a $100 bill in the middle of a football field, 75 miles from where you live, and you told somebody, now look, you can go and drive and you can go get that $100 bill, but while you're standing to get that $100 bill, there's going to be 10,000 people that are going to be hollering and screaming at you for 3 hours. You got to stand there to get that $100. Now, how many of you would drive that 75 miles one way to get that $100? Well, that's basically what high school officials are doing. I mean, they're driving to work a game to help the kids, and basically, in most cases, all they're doing is getting abused. So who wants to do that?
Maybe you're wondering about the numbers Walt threw out there. Let me give you some hard data. NFL officials are not full-time employees like they are in the NBA, MLB, and NHL. Still, at the professional level, much of the compensation can make up for the other issues. How much you make is largely determined by your experience level, but the various sources I looked at reported that the average salary for an official from the 4 major sports leagues ranges from as little as $141,000 a year for a first-year baseball umpire to as high as $550,000 a year for a veteran NBA official. The average NFL official salary in 2023 was $205,000. Again, not all leagues are created equal. At the time of this recording, Major League Soccer was using replacement refs for the 2024 season due to a strike, with pay being the primary reason for said strike. Most experienced referees will make just $95,000 to $108,000 a year, according to The Athletic. Most NCAA officials are not full-time employees, and the numbers are all over the map from the different sources I looked at. At the high school level, it's again based primarily on experience, travel, what sport you're doing, and what state you're in. For a high school varsity football game in Texas, Pay ranges anywhere from $115 a game to $195 depending on how far you have to travel. For soccer, softball, basketball, and baseball regular season games, it ranges from as low as $70 to as high as $170, with greater potential earnings depending on if you're a ref for more than one game in a day. I've heard some people refer to that as being paid well. However you feel about it, it's indisputably true that in other states, it's much worse. In Louisiana, a clock operator will make $50 a game in football, with registered officials making $72 and certified officials making $100. For other sports, individual refs make as low as $42 and as high as $100 per contest. According to a 2023 story by the Fort Collins Coloradan, New Mexico pays its football refs $70 a game, Utah pays them $74, and Arizona $85. But for a high school football official in Colorado, $64.72 a contest, with just one ref being reimbursed for mileage, with the expectation that refs carpool together. Add in the hours that they have to put in training, learning the rule book, travel away from their families, and the fact that coaches, fans, and players are all yelling and screaming at them the entire time, and it doesn't sound like a luxurious occupation. I've seen games have to be rescheduled to other days because they were unable to find officials in time. I once covered a basketball tournament in Alaska that saw the same 3 refs officiate every game in an entire day, from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Even when they make mistakes and it's understandable to get upset, yelling and cursing at someone making $64 during a high school sporting event just seems a little cruel.
I can go to games and sit in the stands, and I'm not very good when I'm sitting there around these people that think they know everything, and they can see better sitting up in the stands 50 rows up than the guy that's right down there. So, but that's the nature of our society. Everybody knows how to do everybody else's job better than they do.
In 2019, the Times-Picayune reported that the average age of a high school ref in Louisiana was 50. That's on par with what I've seen around a lot of other places. I once spoke with a retired official in Texas who said it's harder to find officials these days because younger people don't want to sign up. If they do, they don't stick with it. I've even heard coaches that complain about officiating say that without officials, the game doesn't get played. And while I was working on this episode, for the first time, maybe ever, I began to wonder about when Saints fans threw beer cans at Bill Vinovich and his crew, and wondered if maybe we were wrong. If you're a fan of the Saints or any team ever wronged by officiating, you're probably rolling your eyes. After all, these calls, or lack thereof, change results. It's an official's job to get it right. That's true. But there's something else Walt noted that really caught my attention. It got me thinking about something I've noticed in games I've covered over the years, and about the 2018 NFC Championship game. While the tuck rule play was enormous, changed momentum, and things would have been over if it had gone the Raiders' way, it was one play. I mentioned earlier that Troy Brown had initially fumbled the punt return prior to that drive, only for Larry Izzo to bail him out. If the ball had rolled a little differently, the Raiders may have recovered and could have ended the game there. But they didn't. No one talks about that moment. Eric Allen intentionally listening in on Brady and Weiss's conversation may have constituted a breach of the rules as well. Moreover, after that play, there was still 1:50 left on the clock, and the Pats were at a field goal range, in the blistering cold, with inches of snow around them, and Oakland couldn't get the stop. Oakland kneeled the ball out in regulation. Sure, the coin toss didn't go their way in overtime, but they had opportunities to stop New England. But they let a kid making his 14th career start go 8 for 8 and get into field goal range. At any moment, something else could have gone their way, but didn't. So why this one play? Why is that the moment fans fixated on so much? I'm going to ask that Saints fans not kill me for what I'm about to say, but I thought about what a few other analysts said after that NFC Championship game. The fact is, while the Saints were robbed, there were about a dozen other things that could have gone differently to change the outcome. The Saints were up 13-0 after one quarter, yet they let the Rams back into the game. On 2nd and 3rd down before the no call, Sean Payton opted to throw the ball, rather than hand off to running back Alvin Kamara. Not only would this have forced the Rams to burn their last time out and run more time off the clock, Kamara was one of the best backs in the league that year. It's entirely possible he could have picked up the first down on his own. Instead, an incomplete pass and a blown call ruled an incomplete pass stopped the clock twice. Had Payton called running plays, things could have changed. The defense allowed the Rams to get into field goal range before time expired. The Saints got the ball to start overtime, and yet Brees threw an interception. The defense again allowed the Rams to get into field goal range. Vinovich and his crew were rightly vilified, and every Saints fan on earth is correct to be angry about the NOLA no call. But at the end of the day, there were a dozen other things to be angry about that also cost us the game. Yet we don't talk about any of them. A good friend of mine in Texas has noted a fair point that while players, coaches, and even owners can be fined, suspended, or otherwise punished for mistakes, officials are not. While he's right that there's no fine or formal suspension, it's not 100% correct either. I mentioned earlier that Walt was fine with fans booing because it's part of the job. He was alright with coaches and players getting upset at officiating because it's their livelihood. None of that ever got to him during his career. What did get to him?
The thing that affected me and most of the guys was the evaluations and critiques from your peers that were in the New York office. From a mental standpoint, that was much more difficult for me and the guys to deal with. You have employees and you have to do an employee evaluation on all your employees once a week. And I was in management and owned the company, and I know how difficult it is to do an employee evaluation, but I also know what it's like to have to participate in one. And can you imagine if you got evaluated as an employee once a week? You'd be a basket case. Well, that's what it's like being an official, because they evaluate every play of every game every week, and they give you a report, and they tell you, you missed this call, you missed that call. Well, from a mental standpoint, that was what was the most difficult for us, is to have these mistakes and then have to know that, look, we've got another game to work the next week, and to get yourself mentally ready for that particular game. Because you can probably relate to this, but people would ask me all the time, what were some of your best calls? Well, my problem is I don't remember my best calls. I remember all my screw-ups, all the calls that I missed, the calls that I messed up, and we're all that way. And so that was the mental part that was really hard, was when you make a mistake, to be able to keep yourself up, keep yourself pumped up, and know that what you're doing is important. And I understand that everybody expects you to be perfect and then get better, but that's also impossible.
I don't know what Bill Vinovich thinks about the NOLA no call to this day. I don't know if he feels bad about it. I know he hasn't repped a Saints game since, and I doubt he ever will again. But I will say, when I mentioned being there at the game to Walt, he did say something that made me think back to the beer cans getting thrown on the field.
I was in the game a long time ago, the Bounty Bowl with Dallas up there in Philadelphia, where they'd had the snow, and back then they hadn't made the rule where they had to clean all the snow out from the stands, and they were throwing snowballs at us and at Jimmy Johnson, and it was brutal. The guy, the official that was downfield from me, he got hit with a snowball that was a battery. The battery was packed in into the snowball. So it's nothing new. It's just unfortunate. Obviously, the NFL's done a much better job with cameras in the stands and taking people's tickets away for life. And there's not as much of that as there was when I first got in the league. You go to Cleveland and the dog pound, and those people would be throwing stuff, and Oakland was obviously bad and so forth. But the NFL's done a pretty good job of controlling a lot of that now.
But then Walt said something I had never once considered.
That play in that New Orleans game, it was terrible. And I tell you, nobody feels any worse than that official that they got that play wrong. He has to live with that the whole rest of his life.
That won't matter to Saints fans, I know. Even if Walt is right and Vinovich does feel terrible about the no call, it doesn't change that he suffered no on-field consequences, while the team was robbed of a trip to the Super Bowl. I'm with Saints fans all the way. Still, I go back to that Goodell comment. Refs are human. I don't think of it from the aspect of humans making mistakes. I think of it from the aspect of treating someone like a human being. Bill Vinovich and his crew got it wrong. Nothing will ever change that. I'll always believe the Saints would have been world champs had the call happened their way. But I'm done cursing Bill Vinovich's name and shaming him online. It won't change what happened. It won't fix anything. It just adds to the endless list of online vitriol out there. I have no interest in that. We could go on about this forever. I actually talked with Walt about a lot more, and you'll continue to hear from him throughout this episode. But there was something Walt mentioned that leads me into another aspect of toxic fandom.
The NFL did not allow us to be on social media. We couldn't have a Facebook account, a Twitter account, which probably is a good thing.
Social media. It's something that media members and athletes have had to deal with frequently over the past decade and a half. That leads me to my own experience, as well as that of an athlete I got to know during my time in Iowa. It's time to take a venture into the world of online shaming. In November of 2021, I moved to Waterloo, Iowa, to take a job as the regional sports editor for the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier and the Mason City Globe-Gazette. I was making the move from Fairbanks, Alaska, and I had no idea what I was in for. I was replacing a sports editor who'd been on staff for more than 2 decades and had endeared himself to the entire community. There were also a lot of changes going on at the company that owned our paper, including multiple at the management level. I also have to admit that I wasn't fully prepared for the task I was undertaking. I made my share of mistakes, no doubt. There's also no doubt that the Central Iowa community was unquestionably the most toxic environment I've ever been a part of. I had a coach email and leave me a voicemail in which he screamed at me while telling me I knew absolutely nothing about sports, all because I misspelled one of his players' names. I wrote a preview on a high school game and had a reader drag me on Twitter saying I wrote like an 8th grader. People emailed me to go back to Alaska where, quote, no one cares if you don't know what you're doing, unquote. I had a reader call me and badmouth my mother. I referred to a girls basketball player as a stud while naming her our MVP for the season, only to have someone call me disrespectful trash that needed to apologize this instant. Even other media members jumped in on the pile-on. A local radio host dragged our paper for missing a regular season UNI men's basketball game, and his tweets were quickly picked up by fans and other local media members, getting shared dozens of times. In 5 months in Iowa, I heard it all.
You are such an insecure pussy.
You're an insult and a disgrace. You should really just off yourself at this point.
You're some kind of retard?
I know you came from Alaska, but come the fuck on. You gotta be better than this.
Oh, did the little middle school writer have a piano recital to go to?
Did the 8th grader get stuck in Alaska?
Fuck you, pussy.
You've got a face only a mother could love.
Did you piss your pants?
You're pathetic.
Your sports section is pathetic.
Your reporting is pathetic.
You're pathetic.
Pathetic.
You're so pathetic.
You get the idea. It didn't stop when I left. I took a job with the Amarillo Globe-News in May of 2022. In my intro column, I made a joke about not liking my time in Iowa. A month later, a media member in Iowa picked up the story, called me a failure, tagged my employers in his post, said I'd only last 3 months, and insinuated I was a bad person. 2 years later, when I announced I was leaving for the Chicago suburbs, the same person retweeted me, questioned my journalistic ability, and mocked me for moving again. I'm far from the only sports reporter who has ever had to deal with that sort of stuff. Something to note, though, is that I was an adult in the professional world. These are the sort of things that you have to be prepared for sometimes. What stood out perhaps even more, though, was how this same community treated its kids. There could be an entire series just on the business side of collegiate athletics and the way it's become more and more like professional sports. But at the end of the day, these are still teenagers and people in their early 20s. They're far more vulnerable to harassment like the type I dealt with. They also get it far worse and far more often than I ever did. There are plenty of examples of this that we'll delve into, but I wanted to start with someone I knew. Someone who I saw deal with public online shaming in real time as a barely 20-year-old kid.
My name is Noah Carter. I am a fifth-year senior at the University of Missouri.
Noah was a starting forward for the Missouri men's basketball team for the majority of the 2022 through 2024 seasons. I met him when he was starting for the University of Northern Iowa, where he spent the first 3 years of his career. He and his family also got a lot of the same vitriol that I did when he made the decision to transfer. Noah is originally from Sherrill, Iowa, a small town on the eastern side of the state, close to the Mississippi River.
I use basketball as kind of a getaway because I would try to maintain the best grades I possibly could. Back then in high school, I was trying to get up to a 4.0 all the time. So just trying to stay focused and have a girlfriend, be on the homecoming court, stuff like that. You know, stuff that were big details back then. But one thing that really helped me was just spending time with my family, being able to go hunting, go fishing, living at home. Those were big things for me that, looking back at it, really settled me and allowed me to remain focused and stuff like that.
I once had a coach say to me that all high school athletes who desire to play at the next level think they love their sport. When they get to college, they find out if they really love it or not. I also remember what former All-Pro cornerback Richard Sherman had to say about college athletics back in the time before NIL in 2015.
I would love for a regular student to have a student-athlete schedule during the season for just 1 quarter or 1 semester and show me how you balance that. Show me how you would schedule your classes when you can't schedule classes from 2 to 6 o'clock on any given day. Show me how you're going to get all your work done when after you get out at 7:30 or so, you've got a test the next day, you're dead tired from practice, and you still have to study just as hard as everybody else every day and get all the same work done. Most of these kids are done with school, done with class by 3 o'clock. You got the rest of the day to do as you please. You may spend a few hours studying, then you may spend a few hours at the library checking out books and doing casual reading, and then you may go hang out with your friends and have a coffee. When you're a student athlete, you just don't have that kind of time.
Noah can attest that the schedule at UNI was no joke.
Honestly, it was pretty crazy because obviously I thought I was working hard in high school and I thought what I was doing was good enough. But the first summer getting to college, the first thing I realized is I don't know what hard work is. I had to go through a little bit of a weight loss process. I lost about 30 pounds the first summer when I got to school. So just doing that and understanding what it takes to play at the Division I level, 6 a.m. workouts, conditioning. And then I'd say the hardest thing was the weights at the time. In high school, you just got your one strength coach and maybe your head coach in there, and nobody's really pushing you. We had all of our coaches and our strength coach, and everybody's got eyes on you. So if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then they're going to be on your butt. So just having the coaches on my back 24/7 and just pushing me, it was really difficult at times. Looking back, I'm very happy for it because it got me in better shape and had me on the right path.
After his second year at UNI, Noah initially entered his name in a transfer portal. He said he just wasn't happy with the position he was in. However, after 2 hours, he pulled his name back out, returned to UNI, and had the best season of his career, averaging 15 points a game. At the end of the season, however, UNI missed out on the NCAA tournament, and star player AJ Green, who's now with the Milwaukee Bucks, declared for the NBA draft. Noah entered the portal once again.
After my third year, I felt like it was just my time. It was just, I needed to move on, and it was the next step in my career. And I was very excited for it. It was obviously very, very difficult and very hard leaving my coaches and my teammates because obviously I loved them and I had no hatred, no disrespect to them at all. And I miss them. I still go back and visit them a decent amount. But yeah, just for myself and my path, it was just my time to move on.
I asked Noah what he remembered about the social media comments when he left UNI. He said he didn't remember anything specifically, but I went back and saw some of the things that transpired on Twitter. Shortly after his announcement, Noah's father Joe tweeted out,
"I am very disappointed with the lack of transparency with the University of Northern Iowa men's basketball program. Over the last 3 years, the focus has not been on team. To give an example, the program did not tweet anything of Noah's statement. This happened on the court also."
This was in relation to UNI sending a tweet of congratulations to Green when he announced his intentions to go pro. You can debate whether it made sense for UNI to do the same with a player entering the portal, and you can feel how you want to about Joe's decision to send the tweet. What's unquestionable, though, is the ensuing backlash leveled at Noah and his family was immense.
Look at this absolute no-name loser. What a bum. Perspective. Good word. Perspective would be you spending less time being a clown by tweeting and deleting disrespect toward UNI. Pipe down, Jackson Mahomes.
Jackson Mahomes is the notorious brother of Patrick Mahomes, who has earned a controversial reputation for his antics.
We got multiple Noah Carters grooming on the bench. Get him out of here and get players that want to play for the purple and gold.
Missouri is one of the worst programs in the country, with no support. You went low.
You're part of a poverty college basketball team.
Joe Carter is delusional, and he's harming his kid in service of his own delusional insecurities. He doesn't like Ben Jacobson because he doesn't peddle or tolerate bullshit.
Ben Jacobson is the head coach of the UNI men's team. Joe also received a lot of comparisons to LeVar Ball, and a UNI employee even responded to the tweet.
Well, that's the problem, Joe. You think stuff like that you tweeted out doesn't matter. You owe some people who worked with your son and helped develop him an apology. Man up. Step up. And admit when you were wrong on something you put out on social media. It's been team first from day one.
Fans continued to give it the worst, though.
Noah would be nowhere near the player he is today without UNI. Quit whining and move along to Missouri, Joe. We don't want to hear your complaints.
You were pimping out your son to Kansas State before he entered the portal.
Why? My son didn't get a meaningless tweet. Why? Are you kidding me? How embarrassing.
This is bull, full stop. He has zero credibility.
And they are heavily disappointed in you for being an embarrassing clown for 3 years. Goodbye. Maybe the program was tired of shit like this. Family tweeting and trashing the program ain't a good look for y'all.
This family seems to be a little unstable.
Get bent.
It didn't stop when Noah left, though. A year later, UNI went 14-18 overall and 9-11 in Missouri Valley Conference play, while Missouri went 25-10 with an 11-7 mark in SEC play. UNI missed the postseason, while Missouri went to the NCAA tournament. In March of 2023, Joe sent another tweet that read,
"Man, what a difference a year and a new coach can make. What God has for you, nobody can stop it."
Despite not tagging anyone in the tweet, the UNI fan base inevitably found it anyway.
A dad that has always been obsessed with look at me.
Watch the other day and Noah just set screens. Could have put up 20 a game at UNI, who he actually won a conference title with. Instead, he's a rando bench guy for a subpar Power 5 school who will get bounced early.
Just to note, UNI won the regular season conference title Noah's last season, but lost in the conference tournament to Loyola Chicago and missed the NCAA tournament. Noah also started the majority of the games he played for Missouri. Another fan pointed out that Noah's points per game average dropped from 15 to 9.5 with Mizzou, while adding,
"Yes, vast improvement from starter to the bench too. You sure got that attention you ordered though, which is what this was always about."
Missouri reached the second round of the NCAA tournament where they lost to Princeton in an upset. This time, Joe said nothing, but the UNI faithful did.
It seems that someone that can't beat Princeton has bigger problems.
Mizzou being classless in defeat? Impossible.
Mizzou lost to Princeton, an Ivy League team? I suppose I won't see those moron scrubs in my mentions anymore. Eat shit. Princeton? Good riddance, losers.
Again, you can feel however you want to about Joe's tweets, but Noah wasn't the one sending them. He never asked Joe to do anything. And yet many of those tweets were directed at him, a 21-year-old kid. It wasn't the first time he had to deal with harassment either.
I think for sure in high school, I would let it get to me. I would be consumed by it, whether the opposing student section was making a chant at me or something. And I would try to let it fuel me, but sometimes it would overcome me and I wouldn't be able to focus or maintain my composure. I kind of try to take the perspective of laughing at it. Like the stuff that I heard this year, and even at UNI, I thought it was funny, just the things that they were saying. And I try not to let it strike a nerve and can't let what somebody says take me out of my position, my composure. But yeah, especially at a young age, that was pretty difficult for me to understand. But I feel like as I grew up and got better mentally and at the game itself, I kind of took the mindset of these people aren't in my shoes. They don't really know what I'm going through. So there's no way I'm going to let somebody else that's outside of this game contradict what I'm going and what I'm doing.
While it's mature and commendable for Noah to take such a mindset, that doesn't change that these were people who were cheering for him one moment while cursing his family the next. And while Missouri fans welcomed him on Twitter, that doesn't mean they never let him hear it when he was having a bad game there either.
Obviously, it does hurt a little bit more when it's the people that you expect cheering for you, but I kind of still put it in that same aspect as they're not in my shoes. They don't know what I'm going through, and they don't understand what's happening in this circle, what's happening on this team. So always trying to keep that in mind. So we always talk about don't look into what people are saying, whether it's positive or negative, because they can always switch. So sticking close to my basketball circle with my coaches and teammates and listening to what they got to say. Last year, getting a lot of love at the beginning, and then in the middle SEC play, I wasn't playing my best ball. Looking on Twitter and just seeing a little bit of disrespectful shots at myself and then some of my other teammates as well. And then just hearing pretty much everything. There's not one thing that I can really pinpoint out that people were saying, but there's everything under the sun. If they can say it, they will. Never really got anything in person too often, because obviously I don't think people really, they'd rather sit behind on Twitter and social media and say things that are hurtful. But yeah, just hearing those things, just trying to brush it off your shoulder and move on with it. But sometimes it is pretty difficult when you do hear those things and you wish those people would be able to support you, but it's not always the case.
Missouri finished the 2024 season last in the SEC with no conference wins. On the UNI discussion forum, PantherNation.com, 2 years after his transfer, a fan still took the time to mock Noah, pointing to the Tigers' record in conference play. But Noah also mentioned having ways of turning things off and tuning out the noise, whether it's with his team or by himself.
One of the biggest things that we do as a team is we feed into each other. So we have these things called energy generating behaviors. It's pretty much just a tool used to get your mind off of the last play and on to the next play. So one of the biggest things that we do as a team is we dap each other. So if we ever have a turnover, the two players that are involved in that play, they have to dap before the next play starts. So if I miss one of my teammates and the ball goes out of bounds, I have to go over and dap them before I can do anything else. So being able to do things like that and kind of forget about the last play, I feel like it brings us all closer together too. So like not one of our teammates is by themselves. That they all know that we can talk to each other. The coaches make that very evident as well. So we're really a close team. So it's nice knowing that we have each other's backs. And we also have a mental health team here at Mizzou that we have access to all the time. So being able to know that we have access to them as well, and that we also have our teammates, lets us know that we're not on an island by ourselves and that we can always talk to somebody if we really need to.
And of course, always remember,
the most important part is about having confidence in yourself. And obviously you're going to hit low patches, you're going to get hot, you're going to hit the highest of the highs, and just trying to stay stabilized. Never let yourself get too high, never let yourself get too low. Obviously, there's going to be tough times where you really can't control it, and that's when you really need help. So, try to find somebody that you can reach out to, whether that's a parent, whether that's a teammate, whether that's a friend. Just don't ever let yourself loom in darkness by yourself. And as long as you have somebody with you, you'll be able to get through it and you'll feel better about it. But I'd say the most important part is never let yourself get too low on yourself.
Even in the time before social media, fans chanting obscenities and harassing athletes was something that came with sports territory. Whether it was racist or homophobic slurs or just general trash talk, public shaming came into play in all sports. Former Duke star and 15-year NBA veteran J.J. Redick once spoke of playing a game in college in which opposing fans started chanting, "I fucked your sister," while he was attempting to shoot free throws. Redick's sister wasn't even a teenager yet. Of course, there was the malice at the Palace in 2004, in which a Pistons fan threw a drink at Pacers player Metta World Peace, then known as Ron Artest, which led to Peace charging the stands and assaulting the fan. Philadelphia Eagles fans are infamous for their treatment of opposing fans, teams, and even their own players, as Walt can attest.
I just always was shocked when I would go to Philadelphia, and they would boo their own players. They'd boo their quarterback, and that would mentally affect a player and a coach much more than it would affect me as an official, because that's what I expected. An official expects to get booed. A head coach and a quarterback in their home stadium, they don't expect to be booed.
Don't forget, too, that in the case of high school and college sports, these are just kids dealing with this shit. It's part of the reason it's harder to find young people willing to be officials at the lower levels. I mentioned in the first episode how some pundits and fans treated Arch Manning when he was 15, and the chants Todd Marinovich would endure in his high school days. I wondered what Todd's views on that kind of treatment were.
I catch myself, because for some reason, if I'm emotionally tied to, we'll say, the University of South Carolina, I might catch myself saying something that is not positive about one of their players. And really, it's somebody's son and somebody's grandson, somebody's brother that we're talking about here. And so I cringe, because I'm talking about the collegiate level, but even down to peewee level, that this is going on. And so there really needs to be this is maybe a pipe dream, but a waking up of consideration of the spectators. And why are we there? Is it to enjoy the athleticism? Truly, that's why I watch the NFL. I don't have a team. I watch for the players, because I am amazed every Sunday. I mean, amazed at the athletic ability, because I know that every guy that you're seeing on Sunday is blessed with a gift. They have honed it for years and years and years, which is never seen. And so that's why I had the resentment to so many when they discuss my story and say, oh, he threw it away. You know, if I had it, I would have done this and done this. And it's so much easier, and we know this, to discuss someone else's failings and struggles and journey than to just look at the mirror. I mean, who wants to do that?
I wondered if Matt Bush had a similar experience and how he deals with trolls online. His way of dealing with it is pretty simple.
I don't have social media. The Rangers told me that they didn't want me to back in 2016, and so I've just stayed off it completely, and it doesn't bother me whatsoever not to have it. Everyone has their opinions, and I think a lot of that probably stems from, holy crap, you got this opportunity. I never did. You ruined it. I would have never done that. And I think that's where a lot of that stems from, is people think they would have made the different decision and they would have been smarter with it. But it's all individual based. You can't say what you would do unless you actually go through it. And that's just life right there. You know, I can sit back and say, oh man, like if I would have done this and this and that. But when the situation happens, like in the heat of the moment, that's what's most important, not coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I just constantly was making bad decisions in the heat of the moment, and it just kept mounting on me.
It also has to be said that many people need to be on social media. I have to use a Twitter for my job, and many athletes need it to grow their brand for NIL and recruiting purposes. Remember, as we discussed in the first episode, most of the money that college athletes earn from endorsements come off of social media posts. There's also the upside of social media, such as the fact that I found several people I interviewed for this podcast by using Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. However, You have to go back to that pressure aspect that keeps coming up, as Dr. Janet Finelson explains.
Just that idea that anything that you do is out there. If someone with a cell phone can grab a recording of that and it lives on forever, there's a lot of pressure to that. And then there's also a lot of really difficult things that can happen and continue to come up for athletes when they've engaged in behavior that they regret.
You may be thinking to yourself that sometimes people bring the heat on themselves, and you're not wrong. In February of 2024, Iowa women's basketball star Caitlin Clark broke the NCAA women's scoring record, and the debate began as to whether she was the greatest women's basketball player in college history. ESPN analyst Jay Williams caught flack when he argued that not only was she not the greatest, but because she hadn't won a championship, she wasn't even a great player. When a media personality puts their thoughts out in the public, people have a right to respond to them. And if you're just throwing hot takes out there, you have to expect people to react in turn. However, there's also variables to understand. In October of 2023, reporter Corey Geiger asked Penn State head football coach James Franklin,
"Is there a balance though between, hey, we need you to throw the ball deep, just take a shot. Don't overthink it, take a shot, we need to see it. We're going to call it and we need you to get some confidence in doing this."
Franklin responded by telling Geiger that it sounded like he was speaking from Mars or speaking in Japanese. It's on Geiger to word his question clearly, and it's fair for Franklin to respond in turn. What's not fair is the online heat Geiger got from fans and randos who began DMing him, telling him to kill himself. People commented on his tweet telling him they wished he would be murdered. That kind of behavior is never all right. And that's just one example from the media sides of things. While it was long before the social media era, perhaps the most notorious example of toxic fandom came in the aftermath of the 1994 World Cup. Colombian player Andres Escobar scored an own goal during a match against the United States, which ended up being a 1-0 victory for the Americans that eliminated Colombia from the tournament. 5 days later, back in Colombia, Escobar was leaving a nightclub when 3 men approached him in the parking lot and began yelling at him. 2 of the men then pulled out .38 caliber pistols and shot Escobar 6 times, shouting "goal" after every shot, one for each time the announcer said "goal" during the broadcast. The 3 men drove away and left him there. Escobar bled to death less than an hour later. You might be thinking these are just the words and actions of angry and deranged people. You might believe that it's either a small minority that doesn't need to be bothered with, or that it's a quote-unquote bad portion of the population that simply needs to be rooted out and condemned. Well, there's also another aspect of public internet shaming that isn't just lunatic fans going crazy about the game. Over the course of the social media era, there's been a litany of stories about people doing and saying awful things in their youth on Facebook and Twitter, only to be called out for it years later. In the lead up to the 2018 NFL Draft, old tweets by quarterback Josh Allen resurfaced of him using racial and homophobic rhetoric. One tweet read, "If it ain't white, it ain't right." The tweets appeared to be posted in 2013 when Allen was 17 years old, and the last one was actually a quote from the TV show Modern Family. Allen apologized and said he was just young and dumb at the time. Concerns began to grow that were speculated upon in the media that Allen might slide out of the first round of the NFL Draft because of the tweets. There are still people to this day who occasionally refer to Allen as a racist and a homophobe, just for a couple of dumb tweets that he sent when he was 17. In April of 2018, the night Villanova's Dante DiVincenzo was awarded Most Outstanding Player of the Final Four, a tweet from August of 2011 by DiVincenzo resurfaced, in which he used a racial slur. However, the tweet was actually a line from the Meek Mill song Derrick Rose, and DiVincenzo was 14 at the time the tweet was sent. However, DiVincenzo was white, and he received intense criticism online and in the media afterwards. Remember, this was the night he was supposed to be celebrating winning a national championship. Imagine the uncertainty and mental stress that DiVincenzo had to endure heading into the draft process over things that he said when he was a child. Plus, there was the online shaming he endured from some circles demanding their teams not select him while calling him a bigot. Around the same time, during the 2018 MLB All-Star Game, a series of tweets from 2011 and 2012 by All-Star pitcher Josh Hader resurfaced, in which he used racist, homophobic, and sexist remarks, including posts that read, "White Power," KKK, and "I hate gay people." These tweets ranged from a time Hader was 17 and 18 years old. He apologized for the tweets, deleted his Twitter account, and was required by the league to undergo sensitivity training. His friends and family that were invited to the All-Star Game were given blank jerseys to wear. While Hader has continued to have a tremendous amount of success in the major leagues since then, he didn't know that that was going to happen at the time, and still occasionally receives online backlash to this day. All of this for online postings he made when he was a teenager. I remember one person I knew defending the sensitivity training for Hader while accusing him of, quote, misusing his privilege, unquote. That made me think of a TED Talk by writer John Ronson. He was speaking about his experience writing the 2015 book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. During the talk, Ronson said,
"The phrase misuse of privilege is becoming a free pass to tear apart pretty much anybody we choose to. It's becoming a devalued term, and it's making us lose our capacity for empathy and for distinguishing between serious and unserious transgressions."
There have also been examples of athletes who've suffered real-life consequences. In 2019, Giants quarterback Janoris Jenkins got into a Twitter spat with another user in which he called the user a retard. The online backlash against him was so intense that the Giants waived him shortly after. Former NHL prospect Mitchell Miller has yet to play in the league due to online backlash for his past bullying, including admittedly horrific racist and physical abuse towards a mentally challenged child. While unquestionably horrible, the bullying also occurred when Miller was 14. At the time of this recording, he was 22 and playing hockey in Europe. If you read the details of Miller's case, you likely won't have any sympathy for him, and you're more than okay with him not getting a chance in the NHL. Not many people will blame you either. Still, Dr. Finelson explains why sometimes it's important to remember that for Allen, Hader, and others, the age that they were at the time of these behaviors needs to be taken into account.
There are certain things that are off limits and we shouldn't excuse behavior, but I do think it's really important to remind people about adolescent brain development. And during that time of life, the part of your brain that is supposed to make good decisions and is, not impulsive, it's just not very well connected. And so to judge some behavior that a 14, 15-year-old had, that can be really difficult because you're not really allowing for the fact that young people are still learning. They're going to do things that they regret. They're going to make mistakes. We have to be able to balance those two things, right? Not that we want to excuse really terrible behavior, but we also just have to accept that that's a part of brain development and that adolescents, they're going to make mistakes. And to me, the more important thing is when you make a mistake and you learn from it, what are you going to do next? Is there learning there? Is there a way to kind of really incorporate that and actually have a better understanding of why you shouldn't do something? I think that that's the most important part, and oftentimes that doesn't get focused on because people have been canceled and then that's the end of it. And so a lot of that learning doesn't take place, or we don't get to see that learning that takes place.
You can easily argue that people like Miller and Jenkins haven't learned, but there's also incidents of athletes who were held accountable for mistakes that weren't even theirs due to online pressure. In 2018, while racing as part of the NASCAR Xfinity Series, driver Connor Daly was dropped by sponsor Eli Lilly and Company after it surfaced that his father, Derek, had used a racial slur during an interview in the 1980s. Daly wasn't even alive at the time his father gave that interview. When it comes to social media specifically, Dr. Finelson recommends implementing limits on your time online.
when it comes to social media, for example. You don't have any control over the comments that people put on pages or the things that they say to you, but you can control how much time you spend reading the comments or how much you expose yourself to that stuff, right? And so we try to really encourage athletes to spend time on the things that they have control over, their attitude, their effort, the people in their life that are actual real relationships, as opposed to these virtual people that can make comments to be harmful to them, helping them to build up a little bit of that resiliency so that when the pressure increases, they already kind of have some skills that they can utilize in the moment when they start feeling that the pressure's on now and I've got some skills that I can go to build and to deal with it.
Noah had his own strategies for taking his mind off the online world.
One thing that I really love to do is fishing and hunting. So being able to just have an off day and go out there and clear my mind and really just kind of reset. I think that's one of the biggest things. I think every student athlete should have that thing that's outside of their sport, outside of school, that they can tap into to kind of reset and rejuvenate themselves. And fishing and hunting is that for me.
Taking that time out can be important. There have been plenty of examples of people tweeting and sending things when they were angry in the moment, only to deal with the consequences and backlash later. Sometimes it's important to remember that as tempting as it may be to press send, it's best just to let it go and think about it more later.
Just as a general rule, no matter how old you are or what line of work, if you're emotional and you're heated and you're really angry or upset or whatever, it's just like write it somewhere, but don't put it anywhere publicly. Take a breath, take some time, pause a little bit. That's a good strategy no matter how old you are. Whenever we're reacting emotionally to something in a heated kind of an exchange, we lose a lot of that ability to kind of think about consequences, or maybe we can't completely remove things like Twitter or whatever, but you can develop some habits around knowing, okay, I'm super upset right now. I'm angry. I'm lashing out. It's not the time for me to be putting anything out publicly. Let me process my emotions. Let me think about this. Let me cool down a little bit and put some distance between myself and hitting the post button. And again, that's just a good rule of thumb anyway. I do think that it is possible, though, for us to really move towards at least having some of our own personal limits around how much time are we going to spend on social media.
Social media has become a useful force in social and political activism, connected people throughout the world, and can help provide a sometimes much-needed distraction from everything else going on in the world. Like many aspects of life, though, it's about not letting ourselves get carried away and caught up in everything. I mentioned Jon Rotson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, earlier. It's a great read that I'd recommend for everyone. Something to note for now, though, is that the actions of the masses online can lead to real changes. Maybe we should try to focus them on stuff more important than shaming refs, which has led to an official shortage all across the country at the high school level. The first 3 episodes of this podcast, all the topics we've discussed have had something in common. There's a certain group that I haven't talked about quite as much, even though I should. That's because I wanted to dedicate an entire episode to them, the specific issues they deal with, and how it applies to mental health, and the fact that, according to Rotson's book, they deal with far worse types of online shaming than the other groups we've discussed. So now, I think it's an important time to talk about mental health in athletics as it applies to women. When the Lights Go Out was written, directed, produced, and edited by me, Harpasani. The Ref was voiced by Preston Moore. Nicorobi Coleman was voiced by Jared Lyons. John Gruden was voiced by Aiden Bro. Richard Sherman was voiced by Alan Roberson. Joe Carter was voiced by Craig Sperry. John Ronson was voiced by Sophia Barrett. The Twitter Mob was voiced by Sophia Barrett, Peter Sather, Quentin Williams, Jim Derry, Alan Roberson, Kat Forster, Max Schrammel, Preston Moore, Alex Sharp, Aiden Bro, Jared Lyons, Mario Jerez, and Gabby Schnepper. Corey Geiger was voiced by Jared Lyons. The logo was designed by Kayla Goforth. The music was licensed through Artlist.io. The musicians used were Nano, Yehezkel Raz, Dear Gravity, Beneath the Mountain, Diamonds and Ice, Liquid Memories, Theater of Delays, James Frost, and Yoed Near. The interviews were recorded using Zoom. The episode was pieced together using Descript and published using Spotify for podcasters. Special thanks to Preston Moore, Jared Lyons, and Alex Sharp. Next up, Episode 4, Validation and the Mad Dog.